It's such an interesting balance because I feel like, and I don't know if you were told this a lot growing up, but the phrase, if you love what you do, you'll never work a day in your life. I hate that phrase. Like with
I
the
know.
passion. I hate it. I think there's a difference between like pursuing a career that is your passion. And so like, and then the thing I always tell myself is just because it's a passion doesn't mean you have to monetize it, Morgan.
Hello, Morgan. How are you today? Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I am very excited to be here today to chat about my journey, what I've got going on, answer any questions you have. I'm excited. I love being in front of a mic.
Me too. Oh my gosh. It is one of my favorite things. I feel so empowered with a mic in front of me. It's like a different level. I don't know why.
The only thing that would make it better, so I have a podcast, so I'm in front of a mic a lot. But the only thing I joke that would make it better is if I had like a handheld mic where I was like standing up, like holding a mic instead of this like podcast specific mic that just sits on the table in front of me.
That is such an interesting distinction. I feel like that would just light me up too. We must be the same person. One of my last jobs before I was self-employed was a communications like program manager at some mental health place. And they called me Megaphone McCabe because at all the company-wide events, they would just hand me the mic or the megaphone. And I would just like corral people. I'd be like, we're getting together for a group picture, everybody outside on the lawn. And like, they just called me Megaphone McCabe for that reason. I just love having the voice amplified. It's so fun.
Yes. I am that go-to person as well for events, so I can relate. They're like, Morgan, here's the microphone. Like, go get people to go where they need to go. And I'm like, got it, on it, ready.
Super fun. I could go down this rabbit hole for a while, but let's just embrace that we have microphones in front of us right now and we get to have this exciting conversation about reinvention. And one thing that I love about your work ever since I met you is that you've had this really interesting career path where you started out one way and completely pivoted, but seem to have carried many of the components of your old profession with you. And so I would love it if you could share with the community listening a little bit about your professional and personal background, if you want, and how that's transformed.
I would love to. I love talking about this. So I went to school to become a dietitian. I have a degree in nutrition. The plan was to become a dietitian all along. And I am technically now a dietitian. My senior year of college, I realized that I didn't want to work as a dietitian forever, but it was my senior year of college. Like it was way too late to pivot and change my whole undergrad career. Like I was not about to stay in school for that many more years, which is funny because I did stay in school for that many more years. I ended up getting a master's in business. But this interesting little semester between graduating undergrad and starting my master's, I needed to find a job, but I was in a very unique predicament where I was working for the athletic department of Texas A&M, which is where I got both my degrees from, and thought I wanted to be a sports dietitian. And I was working with the athletic department. I was like, okay, if I am going to pursue that route, I need to like keep my foot in that door. And so I needed to be in College Station Friday, Saturday, Sunday for baseball games because I was working with the dietitian that worked with the baseball team. And I'm from Houston, which is about an hour away. And I was like, okay, I need a job, but it needs to be like Monday through Thursday. And I ended up getting, which was like so specific. I ended up getting connected with a medical practice in Houston that specializes in eating disorders. And I was like, that's not an area that I want to work in, but like it's an office manager role. So like, yeah, sure. Like I'm qualified. Let's do it. And they had someone that was working on Fridays. And they're like, oh no, this job would only be Monday through Thursday. And I was like, okay, clearly this was meant to be. Let's do it. And that was my first introduction into eating disorders outside of a like 1 hour lecture during one clinical nutrition class where we got like the basic definition, which that could be a whole other soapbox of dietitians not having education in eating disorders. It was wild. But during that time, I absolutely, I'm going to say like fell in love with working with eating disorders, which is like a weird thing to say, but getting to see the transformation, getting to see the progress. I am very sciencey, so getting to see like the medical side of things, I was like, oh, this is a cool niche to be in as a dietitian. But I'm going back to school for my master's. Like, I'm not going to work in the eating disorder space. I'm not going to work as a dietitian. At this point in my life, I was like, I'm going to go work for, this is so specific. I'm going to go work for a dairy-based company. So like ice cream, yogurt, cheese, and be their, like work up to be their chief marketing officer. That's how I was going to blend nutrition and business together. Like that was the goal.
That is a very specific goal, but I appreciate specific goals. So good for you.
Yeah, it was very specific, but it seemed really cool at the time until I realized that most creameries are like based in the middle of nowhere and I'm a city girl through and through. So that wouldn't have worked out anyway. But I got connected in the eating disorder space. Long story short, finished my master's in business, decided to do my dietetic internship anyway, and moved to Italy for a couple months because I had no clue what I wanted to do, came back, and in the span of a week, met with 3 friends that I had kind of like met networking and along the way who were all working at the same treatment center. And they're like, we both have part-time job openings at a residential and a PHP IOP level of care. We think you should pursue them and see if you could like put them together and make it a full-time job. And I did, knowing that I wasn't going to work as a dietitian forever, but it just felt like it was the right next move. And so worked as a dietitian for about, 7, maybe 8 months. And then the clinical outreach representative for the treatment center I worked for said, hey, I'm moving and I think you do really well at this role doing marketing and outreach. And I was like, 100%, this is my out. Don't want to be a dietitian anymore. Like, that's it. Let's do it. And so pivoted into that career. Was there for about a year and a half. The tail end of my time there was during the beginning of the pandemic. And so things just shifted drastically of like what that role looked like. And ultimately, it was just no longer a good fit for my skill set, my passions. And so I took the leap full time to work for myself December of 2020, where now I run a branding and web design studio exclusively for eating disorder clinicians. I realized along the way that this design piece was something that I loved and that I really loved the clinicians in the eating disorder space. And so I wanted to keep working with them, especially having the background and the knowledge that is so specific. And that kind of kickstarted this series of companies I started, projects I pursued, now that I had the free time to work for myself and explore other things outside of a 9-to-5.
Wow. Okay. So it was really like a meandering for you. Like you were very open to different opportunities that came up. One thing I'm curious about is you knew right away that you weren't really meant to be a dietitian forever. Mm-hmm. What was it like living in that space of like working in a job you knew you weren't meant to be at?
Yeah, the coworkers were incredible and the work was incredible. Like I loved the work that I did. I loved the clients that I got to connect with and support and all of that. It was just, I knew that I didn't have the energy, capacity to do that full time and give it my all. I have always been a multi-passionate person. I love pursuing a lot of different things. And I think in the line of eating disorder work, like you have to be pretty committed as a clinician to best support your clients. Mm-hmm. And so there always kind of felt like that was a little bit of a disconnect. I also think I didn't have this realization in the moment, but looking back on it, working in higher level of care, like you knew the client was going to be there for a set amount of time and then they were going to move to a different level of care, likely into outpatient. And I think having that set amount of time of like, oh, I'm only going to be working with this client for this, sprint and not a marathon helped me feel really comfortable in that role because I wasn't committing to something that was like, a 3, 4, 5+ year journey that recovery can be at an outpatient level. And so that felt, just in full transparency, felt better to me because I knew that I could make that pivot more easily than if I was working as an outpatient dietitian.
Okay. Yeah, that is good that you were able to like learn these lessons about yourself while you were in this space. And you mentioned the word multi-passionate. And the first time I heard that word, my like heart exploded because I was like, this is me. Like this is, but I hadn't really been exposed to this concept of being like a multi-passionate entrepreneur or a multi-passionate passionate career person. And I
Mhm.
think most people, when they dive into their career path, they think they're going to be set on one journey forever. And was that
Mhm.
how you originally imagined your career to be?
100%. I mean, I think that's also just like being raised by parents in, I don't even know what generation they are, but like their generation.
They're probably boomers or like
Boomers,
Gen X or Gen
Gen X,
X,
yeah,
the forgotten one, because you just forgot.
yeah. But that
Whatever.
was like, that's what was modeled to me, right? Like my dad started with a company whenever I was really little, and he is still working with that company. Like he's retiring this year and he's still with that
Mhm.
company. And
Mhm.
so that's like just having that modeled to me. I was like, oh, like that's the expectation. I go, I work for a company, I work with them until I'm 65 when I'm ready to retire. And like, that's that. That's my
Mhm.
life. And so that's definitely what I envisioned in the beginning, especially going through school of seeing like, okay, how do I, get into a company, work my way up? Side note, you can't really work your way up in a company as a dietitian when you're working for someone else. People don't like to promote
I
dietitians, which is so annoying.
Well, I find this is one thing that's like really tough about working in like a service-based career is that they really only promote you if you have like a higher degree. So it's
Hmm.
like even with experience, there's like this level of like privilege you have to have
Yep.
in order to get to the next level. And then sometimes the pay isn't even reflected. And there's limited positions because it's not
Yes,
like this giant corporation.
exactly.
So I did not realize that when I started working in public health, like right out of college. I loved the idea of climbing up the ladder and like being
Mhm.
promoted and getting achievements. And then when you're in that space, it's a lot harder.
A lot harder. It's not like what the movies make it out to be at all.
You're like, I'm going to climb the ladder of being a dietitian. And you're like, oh, wait, I'm just already here, I guess.
This is
Like,
it. This is the cap, which honestly
mhm,
doesn't really bode well for my personality anyway. So it's probably good that I
mhm,
got out of that space and now get to
mhm.
be a CEO and founder of a couple different things.
I love that. Okay. So you were saying like you imagined your career just being this 30-year long endeavor in one company. And you've mentioned jumping around a few times. How has that made you feel? And did it kind of challenge your self concept at all?
Oh gosh, yes. I've talked about this so much with my therapist. There has been, just to name it for what it is, so much shame of jumping around to a new company or a new role or a new
Mhm,
position
mhm.
pretty much every year and a half that I've been working. And I think I kind of envisioned that as like a promotion each time, which was great, but it hasn't been that. It's been like a full pivot into something totally different. And there's definitely a lot more shame whenever I was like in the corporate space of like, and that self talk was like, who are you that you can't even commit to something for over a year and a half? Like that was like the narrative that I was
Mm,
telling myself.
mhm.
And thankfully, as someone who now like runs a couple companies, small companies, but companies, and being surrounded by other people who are doing the same, I have been able to like shift that mindset into like what a privilege it is to be able to pursue things that are values aligned and say
Mhm,
no to the
mhm.
things that aren't and like have the
Right.
freedom to pursue that. And like there shouldn't be any shame with that. Like there's no reason that I can't rewrite the narrative of like what I want for my
Mhm.
life and what feels good for me and what aligns with my overall life goals and how having different incomes, different revenue streams can support the personal goals. Like we take the personal side out of the corporate side so much and like I'm a human. I want to live. I want to have experiences and have so much fun in my life and I'm an Enneagram 7 and like adventure and curiosity and creativity are like some of my top values in life. And so I'm either going to have a career that can support those values or create my own company that can like pull those values into it. And
Mhm.
that's what I've been able to do. And I'm so thankful for that.
Wow. Okay. So, first of all, I appreciate your vulnerability on the shame piece because I have done the same thing with my career. I feel like I've lived 9 lives. I started out working in hospitals and public health. Then I shifted to life coaching. Then I was a matchmaker. Then I went back to public health. Then I did eating disorder focus. Then I started my recovery collective. And now it's just like all of these pivots that were drastic. Like I said, matchmaker in there. I was a swim instructor.
I was like, let's get back to that really quick. Talking about that a little more.
I literally was, the reason I became a matchmaker was because when I was really young, I was so ambitious. I was like, I'm going to host a relationship coaching event for these matchmaking clients. So I like marched on into a WeWork and like pitched my idea to the lead matchmaker. And she was like, I think you'd be a great matchmaker. So the event never happened, but I was just living in New York needing income anyway. So I was like, sure, I'll be a matchmaker.
Amazing.
So I was. And it was one of the coolest things I've ever done. Like one of my most proud career accomplishments are the couples that are still together today and like have children and are married.
Incredible.
And all of this stuff. But, you know, I've always felt a little shame, a little embarrassment around not having this set path.
Mm-hmm.
And it's also really juxtaposed with having an identical twin who has worked in tech sales her entire career. So it's been this like awkward comparison of like, if I had just stuck to the path, this is what things could look like. And on a outside level, if you're on that path, it's technically a little bit, it appears to be more, I don't know, abundant, successful in the eyes of most people. Yeah, so 100%. This like idea of shame. But I will say, I'm getting to a point. So my sister, one day we were having a conversation about career, and she made this interesting comment to me, which aligns with what you said. She's like, well, you know, it's not like I'm passionate about my job. And the whole idea completely blew my mind because that was the only thing, like, especially when I was starting out my career, that was what I was coasting off of, was like jumping from one passion to the next and having passion in everything I did every single day. So when she's looking at the other side of the fence, you know, it's always like the grass is always greener kind of a thing.
Yeah. It's such an interesting balance because I feel like, and I don't know if you were told this a lot growing up, but the phrase, if you love what you do, you'll never work a day in your life. I hate that phrase. Like with I know. I hate it. I think there's a difference between like pursuing a career that is your passion. And so like even one of my businesses is the eating expedition where I host food focused trips. And I am so hesitant to turn that into a full-time career. I don't think I ever will because I love travel so much and I don't want to ruin that love of travel with a job. But I also think for people who are working a corporate job or haven't taken the leap into entrepreneurship yet or don't want to or can't or, you know, whatever life circumstances come up, because I think there is this narrative of like, oh, just work for yourself and rainbows and butterflies. And like, that couldn't be farther from the truth. There's so much privilege that goes into being able to work for yourself. But I think even working a corporate job, finding something that is contained, boundaried, whatever you want to call it, that you can still have these passions on the side to pursue. And then the thing I always tell myself is just because it's a passion doesn't mean you have to monetize it, Morgan. I tell myself that like a passion can be a passion and you can just do it for fun.
I don't know where I picked up that belief too, that like passions need to be monetized. It must be like American capitalism or something like that.
I think it's the girl boss sector of American capitalism.
Yeah. I don't like, I started, it's like, oh man, like I started this networking group for entrepreneurs in my town, right? And every part of me wants to sell tickets to these groups. And I have, because I'm like, the point is connection. I don't need income from this. Like we will get value from being together and like learning from each other. And like, I think it's just so funny that you said that because I completely relate to it. And I want to acknowledge how important it is to challenge the narrative, you need to be a full-time entrepreneur to be fully aligned, right? Because I think that's something
Yeah,
you and I probably bought into at some point, right?
absolutely.
And that puts a lot of pressure on people. Not everyone is cut out to be this full-time entrepreneur, fully supporting themselves. Some people need more security, and it's completely okay
Yeah.
to have a little bit of security and a passion on the side. And it doesn't have to be your career.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. It is just one of those things where that narrative was always kind of baked in. So if anyone here is listening and you're like, oh my God, two girl bosses talking, I want to roll my eyes. It's like,
Literally. Oh, man.
we are not telling you you need to jump everything. Like reinvention can happen on so many different levels. It could be on a career level
Mhm.
and a personal level. And I think I've actually gotten some of the most joy from reinventing on a personal level. Have you ever gone through reinvention in that way?
Oh, that's a big question. I mean, I think in terms of like challenging the narrative of like reinventing my reality is like I've gained so much independence over the last several years.
Mm.
The narrative that and I honestly, I'm still challenging this of like, man, entrepreneurship would be like way easier if I had a partner that I could also like lean on that had a stable job and had health
Mhm.
insurance. Like, I think that narrative has been hard to challenge sometimes. But I think like, I mean, I've lived by myself for the last, oh gosh, 8 years, probably 9 years, 8 years.
Mhm.
I've done more solo travel by myself. Whenever I was in this like position of going through my internship, figuring out what I wanted to do, I actually ran across a Facebook group and a community of girls who solo traveled. And I was like, oh, like that's kind of like the dream. Like that sounds so cool. And I solo traveled for the first time, spending 3 months in Italy by myself in a city that I had never been to.
Mm.
And like, that was like a little too much. That was a little too extreme. I'm so thankful for that experience. But like, holy shit, it was so hard. But it's allowed me to be in a position and be pushed so far outside of my comfort zone and like go through like literally crying every other day in Italy because all I wanted to do was go home and like be like, I should be enjoying this. This should be so fun. And it's not to where
Wait a
now.
minute. I'm actually shocked to hear that it was really hard to solo I felt like it would have been like this natural fit for you,
It's
but
become a
I
natural
guess not.
fit, but I
Okay.
much prefer to travel with other people. I didn't speak Italian. I lived in a city where English wasn't super common. It was my first time spending that much time by myself. And so it was just
Mm.
an adjustment, and it was a brutally eye-opening adjustment to do that. And here we
Mm.
are. When was that? We're here 6 years later, and I have 2 6-week trips planned this year to be by myself in Mexico City and in Spain. And so like
Mm.
we made it where it gets here, like it happened. But I think that was definitely like a reinvention of forcing myself to not wait on other people to do the things that I wanted to do in my life.
Mm. And I feel like that must have been this learning experience that completely transformed who you were. Like I'm
Absolutely.
honestly shocked that like solo travel, based on what I know about you,
Mhm.
that it was really hard at first. But I guess that makes sense
Yeah. Well,
because it is scary.
it was scary. And
Yeah.
I think it would have been different if I had the experience of like traveling around to a bunch of different cities, staying in hostels, keeping things new and fresh, like constantly meeting new people. Like I think that would have been a very different experience. But I was very set on doing some slow travel. And so like I had an
Mhm.
apartment in one city for 3 months. And
Got it.
it was like a studio apartment. I was by myself. I didn't have a naturally built in community like you would find. I mean, even just staying in a
Hmm.
hotel, like when I'm in hotels, like I go to the bar and like meet people all the time and like still stay in touch with some of those people. And so I think it was just a very, very different experience of like solo traveling for like fun and travel versus being somewhere for 3 months and just like living life there.
Mm. So how would you say that experience like helped you bring awareness to yourself? Because I think you said you learned so much about yourself during that time.
Mhm.
Like, so all of this learning led to you eventually becoming a retreat leader.
Yeah.
Tell me what you learned about yourself and how that kind of contributed to your like total reinvention.
Yeah. I mean, I have a vivid memory of like my second day living. So I was in Genoa, which is like on the northwest coast of Italy.
Mm-hmm.
I have this vivid memory of like my second day there. I was like, Morgan, get up, go fight jet lag, like go find a pizza place, like go get a pizza. And so I like nervously Googled like where I should go get pizza and like found a place. I kid you not. I made 3 laps in front of the, like 3 circles around the front of the pizza place before I gathered enough like courage to go in and get over the fear that I'm going to have to speak Italian or figure something. And if I was with a friend, like that would be no problem. We would have strolled right in there and it would have been easy peasy. But there was something about having to figure it all out by myself that I was like, oh my God, so nervous. And it was like over the course of the 3 months. So that was kind of like, day 2. And probably the last that I was there, I was going on a solo hike in Cinque Terre. I had taken the train down. And it was something as simple as there was a mother-daughter that was also hiking that I had like, we had like kind of passed each other as we were hiking and taking breaks. And I eventually was just like, made a comment to them, said hi, introduced myself. And we ended up doing the rest of the hike together, catching up. And it's just wild how like when you just like commit to doing something, like just doing that one thing. And I think over the 3 months, like it was just like, the phrase, like you just like rip the Band-Aid off. Like it was literally 90 days, like daily. It's like ripping the Band-Aid off. Like, let's just keep doing this. I kind of think of it as like exposure therapy where like I was forced to speak to people, make connections, not be like a hermit because that I wouldn't have thrived either if I just like stayed in my apartment all day. And I feel like the kind of like grand lesson from that is like, you don't get what you don't ask for. Like, just do it. Just take the risk. My mantra of last year, which I feel like kind of embodies this, was do it for the plot. If you do something and it's wildly unsuccessul or wildly embarrassing, at least you have a fun story to tell.
Do it for the plot. I love that. Yeah. I saw a meme once that was like, whenever your life changes, just yell plot twist and go for it.
And keep going. Yeah. The majority of the plot twists that I've had in my life are now some of my like favorite stories to tell over dinner with friends or people that I'm meeting for the first time. And like in the moment, it is awful and it sucks and it's embarrassing and we're like, this is not what they show in the movies. But then like, hindsight 2020, it's a story to tell. Like it's an experience that you had that just shows your resilience to like keep going as a human.
Yeah. I feel like you bring up a few good themes here. And one is that the act of reinventing yourself, the act of making these like plot twists, they're all taking huge risks, which is really scary in the moment, right? But I find it's the opportunity to build self-trust, right? And we can see that in your story from like you being afraid to walk into a restaurant and then by the end of it, going on this hike with 2 people you spontaneously met and like having the best day ever. So I think it is really exciting to think about, and this is like definitely a personality thing, but I think it's exciting to think about reinvention as like the ability to take a little bit of a risk to learn more about yourself and trust yourself. And every time I've ever taken that leap of faith, my self-trust increases. Whether I fall flat on my face and it's a total failure or a slight success or big success, I'm always gathering data about myself and transforming in the process, which is a win in my book.
Absolutely. I was doing some consulting for a mental health tech startup, and one of the gals that I was working with used the phrase, bad days make good data. And I know that's like definitely like a techie corporate whatever phrase, but I've kind of adopted that into like my personal life as well of like, if something goes wrong or I don't respond to something the way that I, quote unquote should have or whatever that is, it's like, okay, instead of being so hard on myself for so long, it's like, okay, like that was a bad day. Like what can I collect from that to make changes in the future? Like instead of being so bogged down with those negative emotions, which like I sit in those too. Well, really, I'm good at intellectualizing negative emotions, and I'm not as great as feeling them, but still having them
Love
there,
the
right? I'm not
openness.
saying like don't ignore your negative emotions. Like that's not a good thing either. But it's being able to, I like taking action with things. And so being able to be like, okay, like here's how I'm processing this, how I'm feeling this, like being able to take those like visceral reactions, those thoughts, what's coming up for me, and be able to pivot those into something that is more like forward thinking.
I completely agree with you on that. And, I'm thinking about the listeners here. I know that there's so many people in this audience who are actually terrified of change and maybe couldn't even fathom making a drastic change in life.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it's something that their heart like really wants, but they're terrified. So what advice do you have for people who are like just thinking about making a pivot or taking a risk in life that could potentially change everything?
Yeah. I would say the one thing that has helped me a lot is reminding myself to not compare my day one to someone else's day 1000. I think it's, especially with social media, it's really hard to see someone who now, I mean, like even me part of this, like I have done a lot of change, and the glimpse that you're getting right now listening to this is my day 1000. And you might be on day one, and that's okay. And I'm on day one for some things too. And I'm on social media looking at someone's day 1000 and be like, oh my God, I want that. But like, that seems so far-fetched. Like there's no way I'm going to be able to do that. And so that's one piece. The second thing is like find one person that you can talk to about it, that you can, and like therapist, mental health, yes, but I'm talking like a friend, a family member, because having that little bit of accountability is going to, like, that's the first step of like talking about it with someone else. And I actually have one of the businesses I co-run is called the Accountability Club, where me and another clinician who's also my podcast co-host, like literally have a cohort of people who are wanting to make moves in their business, specifically in their business, but it could also be like, same concept with personal things too. And just being able to have a community or a person that is like-minded, values aligned, can kind of like be your cheerleader is going to help with that, of being able to just like have a space where you can like speak the big, scary dreams and speak about the end goal, and then have someone there who's also going through these little like micro daily steps forward, steps back with the end goal still in sight.
I think those are two really great pieces of advice. And I think when it comes to talking to someone, I love that is a very easy first step for anyone, right? You're like considering a change. You're really nervous. Going to a trusted person just to like dream it out a little bit, just to externalize it, verbalize it, and get some sort of encouragement or validation that, hey, maybe this idea is pretty awesome. And there's someone who has like a shred of belief that I can do it. Not just me thinking this, but like maybe the person you talk to like helps you get some ideas flowing. And then suddenly you're filled with inspiration, which I think is such a motivator towards taking those leaps of faith towards reinvention. It's like, oh my gosh, I'm so inspired to shift my life. And having that hype person is so important. So I think that's a really good piece of advice.
I feel like I've gone through this process so many times. I probably have a new idea every single day, and it's hard not to bring them all to fruition. But whenever something has like stuck, I have 3 people that I go to, and I have it down to a T. They each have a different role in this like idea generation. I have one friend who is like my cheerleader, my hype girl, and was like, heck yeah, Morgan, you can do it. You've got this. Let me know how I can support you. Here's someone I know that, you might be able to talk to. It's kind of like similar, whatever. I have one friend who's like, love this for you. Is this going to be a passion project, or do you need to figure out how to make money from this? And if you need to figure out how to make money, like, let me support you in that. And then I have one friend who is like the pessimism to my optimism. She's an incredible friend, but anytime I need someone just to like give it to me straight, she's my girl. Because I'll be like, I have this idea. And she'll be like, okay, but did you think about this, this, and this? Because like, you're going to have to figure that out. And I'm like, oh, shoot, you're right. Like, I didn't think about that. Like sometimes my head is just so in the clouds that I just like need that person to also be like, yeah, I mean, if you do like X, Y, Z, then yeah, of course you could do that. But like you need to think through those things first before you pursue this. And I have my little trifecta of friends that are able to support me in all the different pieces.
That is a perfecta trifecta. Because I never had that. I never had that negative friend or the like pessimistic friend. Well, first of all, I'm listening to you and I'm like, maybe I needed to bounce ideas off of people more. Like I would just like plow through all of my ideas. Everything I've ever done was learn as you go. Like I don't have a business degree. I don't even like, it's like, we are plowing through this. And I did a lot of wheel reinventing for a long time. Like it was like things were already there. I'm like, I created this. And people would be like, this has been around for like a decade.
That is definitely something I go through too, where I'm like, this new brand idea. And they're like, okay, like these 3 people that are doing it over here. And I was like, dang it. I could have learned from them. I don't have to totally start from scratch. And I love starting from scratch. And so that's a hard thing for me.
So I think that's good to have that balance. And like, that is a great first step. Just reaching out to the people you trust about this idea. And maybe even finding like a mentor or a role model who's had this path that you're considering, right? And then the other piece you brought up, which is also really helpful, is that don't compare your day 1 to day 1,000. And that has always been something I had to learn the hard way. Like when I started my one-on-one coaching practice when I was 24, I expected to be like Marie Forleo and Gabby Burns, all these people. I expected to be them the day I decided to do it. Like I was like, why isn't this lining? Working. I am believing in myself.
Yeah.
And so you have to, it's actually very humbling to be an entrepreneur at sometimes and live a life that's truly authentic, because you do have to really like recognize everything takes time and you can't just wake up being this superstar overnight. Nobody ever does. Yeah. Could be 20 years before you reach that level that you want to reach.
Exactly. Me and my podcast co-host just did a webinar about like the next big thing for people who are wanting to like explore side passions, whatever. And one of my favorite references that I pulled in is like, you're not going to be an overnight success. It's just like in the movie, He's Just Not That Into You, where they're like, you are not the exception, you're the rule. There are probably a handful of people that are going to be this overnight success. We're not going to be that exception. We're the rule. It's going to take work. We have to be scrappy. We have to do a lot of stuff behind the scenes. We have to make a lot of pivots in I'm speaking of like business, but also in our life of like having to like kind of dip our toe in a lot of different waters and figure out what works. And most of that is done behind the scenes. Like people don't get a front row view into those first few years of really making the pivots and reaching towards the long goal.
Right, exactly. And I think one thing, have you ever had your long-term goal? It sounds like you have evolve. So like you're set on one long-term goal and then it changes and you're like, why does this keep happening?
Yes. I've honestly kind of given up on like really long-term goals.
Yeah.
The way that I have like shifted all of my structure is like, I have a long-term goal of what like I want my personal life to be like. And I don't do long-term goals with the business because that changes way too much. And so I have found it more helpful to be like, okay, in 3 to 5 years, what do I want my personal life to look like? And then let me now set quarterly and annual goals for the business that are working towards what I need flexibility-wise, structure-wise, financial-wise, all of that in order to get to where I want to be in my personal life. And that's been a really helpful switch because my career stuff changes all the time. Like my goals change all the time. Opportunities come up all the time. And it's exhausting to set long-term goals for that because we don't freaking have a glass ball. We can't look into the future. And so I'd rather look into like what my dream personal life would be and just like make decisions to pursue that.
I love how free flowing that is and how you've actually like surrendered the idea of like these huge, massive, long-term goals. Like it could just be like your personality like desires more change and you learn as you go about who you are. And there's nothing wrong with that. And I think we're in this culture where we are just set in stone and like you can evolve within your path, but you can't expand and like change completely. So I want to actually bring it all the way back to something you originally said, which is the idea that you were in a job that you weren't like really positive about. You weren't sure about, like, even before you graduated, you're like, I don't know if this is for me. What tips do you have for people who are in that place who have no idea where to go? Like, how does one start to explore their idea of maybe reinventing themselves?
I feel like whenever I was in it, I did not have the process to like be like, oh, I'm going to do this. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do this. Like sometimes I think it literally takes just like going through it. Like I feel like there's people that are like, if I could tell my younger self X, Y, Z, and I'm like, okay, yeah, like that's great. There can be some great information in there, but I think a lot of the times it really just takes going through it, which is like probably not what people want to hear. But I think it's the reality. Like there's no magic script. There's no magic to-do list out there. The book that I have gone back to over and over again is a book called Choose Wonder Over Worry by Amber Ray. And she's made a lot of pivots in her life. It's been very inspiring to see like her personal journey. She doesn't share too much of it anymore, but whenever I first listened to her on a podcast several years ago, she was pretty open with like everything that was going on in her life. But she wrote this book and it's basically how you can look at all of these different hard things that come up, these negative self-talks, instead of choosing worry and continuing to like worry about something that like in the grand scheme of things is like not a big deal. How can you choose wonder instead? And she goes through each of those. I think she probably goes through like maybe like 18 different emotions, feelings, circumstances, and allows us to recognize that, hold space for that, not, shove down those hard feelings, but also kind of look at the other side of it too and figure out what we can do to like move past some of the hardness.
I love that phrase, choose wonder over worry. I think that really resonates with me. I actually have never heard of that book before, so now I'm really curious. Yeah. And so is she basically talking about looking at those potentially worrisome situations and getting curious about them or seeing the possibilities within that?
Yeah. So she starts off the book with, there's two different types of worry. There's useful worry and there's unuseful worry. And we shouldn't all get rid of our worry because there's some worries where it's like, oh, we probably shouldn't walk out into like the middle of an interstate, right? Like that is some worry that is very useful worry where our brain's like, don't do that. Like red flag, stop it. But then there's certain unuseful worries that hold us back from being able to explore and test out and challenge the status quo in our life. And it's how can we recognize that unuseful worry and like gently challenge it to be something that's helpful.
I think that is such a great piece of advice that we could leave the listeners with today is really this idea of questioning if your worry is useful or unuseful. And how can we look at it with a sense of wonder versus just letting that worry hold you back, right? It's like this cool exploratory curiosity energy that you can live in instead of staying stuck in like overthinking and being afraid.
Absolutely.
Well, this has been such a joy, Morgan. Thank you so much for joining me on the show. For everyone listening who have connected with what you have to say, how can they find your work?
My Instagram is probably the best place to find it because I love Instagram. I show up there daily. And in my Instagram bio, I have kind of the 3 different projects linked that I'm working on. So personally, I'm on Instagram at Morgan Sinclair. And then from there, you can access Morgan Sinclair Designs, which is my branding and web design studio. You can access the Eating Expedition, where I host food-focused trips around the world. You can access Weight Inclusive Innovators, which is the business podcast that I co-host for entrepreneurs and mental health clinicians.
Woohoo! Thank you. Oh my gosh. So fun. Love that you have 3 businesses to list. So with that, Morgan, I'm going to give you a big Thank you. And I'm excited for this episode. I know the listeners are going to love it. I hope you have a beautiful rest of your day.
Thanks so much, Meg. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome.